Okay, so we're going to keep talking about the dynamics of ecosystems and how all the living and non-living factors influence each other within an ecosystem. So this is our part two of the lecture. First lecture, we just talked about some of the basic cycles. You have carbon, hydrological, nitrogen, and phosphorus cycle, and how those are influenced, which organisms or groups of organisms are playing critical roles in those, and what they basically are. Again, that's just the brief overview. More detail, move into upper level courses for that. So what we want to look at now is energy. Every living thing needs energy. All life needs energy. And depending upon where you get your energy from, you will be placed at a particular trophic level. Now, trophic level is, there's a lot of ways to describe this or define it. The way I want to describe it or define it to you, how I want you to understand it, will be the trophic level is the position within the food chain. Where do you fit in the food chain? Make a little note here. Level 1 is at the bottom, or I should say base of the food chain. As you go up in number, up in trophic level, you move higher in the food chain. Now, big thing to stress, not everything fits cleanly into this. We're talking about living things, so not every group fits perfectly into this. This is a general picture of how trophic levels are set up and how they are arranged within ecosystems. All right, so kind of dumb parallel. Guys ever watch a bunch of people get together and create a pyramid? Think about that. Here's your pyramid. You got your base, you have your next level, so on. As you move up the pyramid, the size, and that's kind of a crooked pyramid, the size of your levels gets smaller. The whole thing to focus on, though, is the initial size of that base determines everything above it. And I'll put a little disclaimer, in terrestrial ecosystems. Aquatic ecosystems, they play by a little bit of a different rule. All right, but let's focus on terrestrial right now. Trophic level 1. Here we are. Right there. These are your producers. What kind of producers, photosynthesizers do you have? Do you have seedless vascular? Do you have non-vascular? Do you have vascular seed plants? That picture looks like some ferns and maybe some, I don't know, kind of small. I can't see it that well. Maybe those are hornworts, non-vascular plants. Maybe it's grasses. Whatever the case is, that establishes the base. Trophic level 2 will be the animals that feed upon the producers. Or the way this is depicting it, this little arrow says energy is flowing from the producers to trophic level 2. Or you could say grasshoppers eat plants. Both directions are completely correct. Get comfortable with one, understand both. Now you're at trophic level 2. Grasshoppers eating that grass. Well, along comes a shrew. Shrews are going to be sitting at trophic level 3 because the grasshopper energy will transfer to the shrew when the carnivore eats the herbivore. So remember, carnivores, herbivores, omnivores, etc. This is where these things come into the picture. So then you got your shrew, trophic level 3. Hey, life's good. Well, sometimes shrews get eaten. Here comes the owl. Eats the shrew that was eating the grasshopper that was eating the plants. The energy of the shrew transfers up to trophic level 4, the owl. Now, everything dies. Bottom line, everything dies. That energy all transfers to detritivores, things that break down organic material. We could also put in here the decomposers. Oh, here I go trying to write posers. So all of that energy will eventually transfer to these guys. And then the nutrients that the decomposers make available, they break down, decompose, they release those nutrients. Those nutrients, in the form of nitrogen, phosphate, even carbon, cycle back to the producers. Okay, but what we're looking at here with trophic levels is literally who eats whom. And again, some groups don't fit cleanly. Where would you put an omnivore? In some cases, an omnivore might be trophic level 2 if it's eating the plant. But if that omnivore is eating an animal, well, then that'd probably move it to trophic level 3. So it's not always black and white, clear cut when we deal with this stuff. But the general pattern, producers are trophic 1, herbivores are trophic 2, carnivores are trophic level 3. We really don't assign, and carnivores can go to trophic level 4. Rarely do you have a trophic level 5 with another carnivore up there. It's just not really that likely. Usually you're looking at 3, maybe 5 species in this chain of trophic levels. All right, so here's a better example here. And this is putting some numbers to this. Burn this number in your memory. And I know I've hit a lot of you with this number before. I really can't stress enough how important understanding this is. When we look at trophic levels, we're looking at the 10%, oh, that's supposed to be percent, rule of energy transfer. 10% on average of the energy available moves to the next level in the ecosystem or in the next trophic level. So just making up easy numbers. And again, it's not a perfect, works every time type of scenario. It's the general concept. If your producer base contains 5,000 calories worth of energy, so think about it. How much corn is that? How many wheat plants? How many tomato plants? How many apples or apple trees, etc.? 5,000 kilocalories, or you can measure it in calories or in joules or whichever unit you want. When that gets consumed by the herbivore, so the herbivore level eats the producers, only about 10% of that energy makes it to the herbivores. I've never seen a grasshopper eat the root system of a tree. They don't eat the bark. They eat part of the apple but leave a lot of it. So a lot of that energy does not transfer to the next level. A lot of that energy is wasted, lost as heat. That's part of metabolism. It's lost in all sorts of different ways. Only about 10%. So you're literally moving your decimal over one position as you go to the next trophic level. Now, as the herbivores are eaten by the first carnivore, what we call primary, these guys munch on them, 10% of the herbivore energy goes to the carnivore, the primary carnivore. Oh, so let's reduce the 500 down to 50 kilocalories. Secondary carnivore eats the primary carnivore, only about 5 calories make it to that secondary carnivore. So let's go back to this one for a second. This is why in a given community, the population of owls will be significantly smaller than the population of producers. There's your pyramid again. The top species, top trophic level, can only have a handful of individuals because it takes the flow of energy through each of these levels to support them. So start putting it all together. Top level carnivores, typically type 1 species, Small populations, slow to mature, things lower in the trophic levels. Big populations, lots of individuals, no parental care, grow up really quickly. So all of those reproductive strategies, life histories, survivorship curves, all of that starts coming into play when we look at ecosystems and energy transfers. All right, so the producer base is incredibly important in influencing the number of trophic levels. So producer base influences the number of trophic levels. The bigger your producer base, the more trophic levels you can have in a given ecosystem. So this is why rainforests, right here, rainforests have a massive amount of energy. This is net energy units per area. Don't worry about the world. This is globally. But okay, rainforests, algae beds, coral reefs, huge producer base. That's why they're so rich in biodiversity. Yet you come over here and you go, oh, what's a desert going to have? Not much. Right? Now the challenge when we start talking about where does a deciduous forest fit? Here we are. Here's our producer base. When we look at temperate grasslands, producer base, and then we go, oh, well, where does agriculture fit? Agriculture, cultivated land, right there. So agriculture actually has a higher producer base than grasslands. There's our grassland. So people might make the argument, well, we actually have a bigger producer base with a cornfield than if this was a prairie. That is true. But you have a monoculture. You have one species or very few species because you're going to have some weeds and other things. But the biodiversity is massively reduced in cultivated land compared to a prairie. So it depends on what your focus is. If you're only worried about big producer base, yeah, cornfield's going to have more than grassland. But if you're looking at biodiversity, ecosystem stability, habitat, all those other factors, grasslands are going to be far better than cultivated land. Same thing with deciduous forests. I mean, their producer base is bigger. That goes without saying. All right. So again, when we look at this energy flow, we have to start and look at the producer base and figure out how does that support each level above it. Now, when we look at ecosystems, what we see are these different impacts, or we call them effects. In some ecosystems, we have a bottom-up effect, and in other ecosystems, we have a top-down. And sometimes today it's a bottom-up, next month it's a top-down effect. But a bottom-up effect is something, a factor, that influences the lower trophic level, or I could say levels. And that ripple effect works its way up. All right, so here's a quick example of a bottom-up effect. Take a lake, and you go, all right, fertilizer runoff increases the phosphate and nitrogen levels in the lake. Sounds good, right? Because that increases your producer base. So now the producer base gets bigger, so the phytoplankton population increases. The zooplankton population increases. That means more herbivores. Sounds good. That should mean more carnivores can be supported. So what you've done is you've just increased the size of your pyramid. That should allow bigger levels as you go up the pyramid. Awesome. Everything looks really good. But in the next lecture, we're going to talk about how this sometimes doesn't turn out so well in the end. Check out the next lecture.